Hey, I'm Victor Stepanoff. I'll be guiding you through this Blender tutorial. Today we're going to be learning how to run Blender from the command line. Now, if you've never worked with the command line, don't worry. This video is for you. I'll be going over the basics of how to work with the command line. I'll also share some concepts that will help you understand what we're doing with the command line. This video is for macOS users. If macOS is not your primary operating system, check out my other two videos for Windows users and Linux users. I'll provide a link in the description. In this video, we'll be looking at why you would want to run Blender from the command line, how you would do it, and I'll also share some examples of how to do this. So, why would you want to run Blender from the command line? We don't have to search for the answer because the Blender developers have provided the answer for us in the documentation. So under Advanced Command Line and Introduction, they state a number of use cases that you would want to use Blender running from the command line. The very first one is rendering an animation. You might think that you could do this with Blender running. Sure, but you might want to automate this process. The second part is automation and batch processing. You can write Python scripts that could process files and assets really quickly without you having to do it by hand. So this is a good way to run those scripts. Also, Python development is the third use case. When working on a Python script, you would usually print out messages for yourself to understand where the script is or maybe some error that's going on. And the print statements will go into the command line that you've launched Blender from. Maybe Blender exits unexpectedly, and to find out what's going on, if you ran Blender from the command line, you could see some output, maybe errors, warnings that happen before Blender crashes. Sometimes the Blender developers, if you're helping troubleshoot an issue with them, they'll ask you to run from the command line and get extra logs. So how do we run from a command line? Well, let's take a step back and look at what you can actually do with the command line. Primary things that we usually would do with the command line is navigating the file system and then launching some commands or some programs. Navigating the file system is the same thing as you would do in your file manager. On Windows, it's Explorer, on Mac, it's Finder, and then a Linux version of that is the thing that you would use to navigate the file system by hand through a graphical user interface. But with the command line, you'll do this with the terminal without having any GUI. Launching and running a program is this exact same thing as clicking on the icon of the program that you want to launch. But this happens without the icon, and you just do it with a keyboard through the terminal. Files usually divide into programs that you can execute and then some data files. For example, the programs are Blender, your favorite browser, and so on. And the data files are the Blender project, maybe some MP4s, and so on. Just as there are rules when we speak English, you have to put words in particular order so people would understand you. The same thing goes on a command line. You have to put the command in a particular order so the computer will understand you. For example, you have to first put the name of the program that you want to execute, and then followed by a list of command line arguments. For example, here you can see that we have Blender as the program that we want to launch. And then next we have a number of command line arguments that tell Blender to run in background mode, to use the file.blend project file, and then to render the 10th frame. So what are command line arguments? Think of them as preferences that you can set in the Blender's preference menu. You can set these checkboxes and input different values to configure Blender. The same thing goes with command line arguments. You can configure Blender using those. There are three primary types of command line arguments: flag arguments, arguments with values, and then positional arguments. Flag arguments are the same as checkboxes in the preferences. Either it's enabled or disabled. So if you put the flag in the arguments on the command line, it means that you're enabling this flag, similar as you would enable the checkbox for some setting that you want to enable. Arguments with values are again similar as preferences with values. You specify them and then you give a particular value that you want Blender to apply to that setting. Some arguments need to be placed at a particular location in the arguments list for the program to understand them. For example, Blender has a number of arguments that would affect Blender itself, and then you would specify the project file that you want to work on, and then maybe some values that would override the settings in the project file. For example, using another render engine, or maybe rendering some frame, or maybe using some other image output format. Now let's take a closer look at the arguments that Blender provides us. Again, you can find them in the documentation for Blender under Advanced Command Line and Command Line Arguments. I'll put a link in the description for you. This page specifies all the command line arguments that you could specify for Blender, and gives you good documentation explaining how you can use these arguments and for what purpose. Also note that there are two ways of specifying this particular flag. Remember, I was talking about flag arguments. This is exactly a flag argument, telling Blender to run in the background without booting the UI. This is an example of an argument with value, stating the argument name and then having some value followed by that argument. Notice that some of these arguments are going to have a short version, so this is a shorthand. Instead of typing out this whole word, you can just type out B and Blender would understand you. Note some of these arguments will be capitalized if they're using just one letter. I would highly encourage you to go through this page and look at some command line arguments that you could use for yourself. We'll look at some of them in the example section of this video. The Blender developers have provided us some examples of how to render from the command line. There's a web page, I'll link it in the description as well, where you can take a look at the examples. So if we scroll down, we can see some examples. And for example, if you want to render a single image, this would be the command that you would run. And the Blender developers have provided us the commentary of what exactly this command does. In this particular case, we are running Blender without the UI. Then we're loading this particular blend file project. And then we're rendering only the 10th frame. Make sure to check out this documentation for more examples. Make sure to give this video a like if you're getting value from this video and learning something new. Alright, let's take a look at how this is done in practice. I'm running macOS Ventura. Everything that I'm planning to do is going to be the same for any other macOS version. So the very first thing that we need to do is we need to find where the Blender executable is in the file system. The easiest way to do that is if you have that Blender icon in your dock, you just right click on it and go to Options and then go to Show in Finder. This will probably take you to somewhere in your applications or maybe some other folder that you have Blender installed in. Then you'll need to press Show Package Contents. Then you can navigate to Contents, macOS, and then you can see this Blender right here. So if you click on it, Blender will launch for you. All right, let's close it. So the fastest way to get the terminal open here is to right click on macOS and then go down here and press the new terminal app folder. This should open the terminal in that folder. You can actually write this command, the pwd command, to see where exactly this is. You can see my Blender is installed in Applications Blender app, and we can launch Blender by typing in period and then Blender, and then running and hitting enter to start Blender. All right, let's close that. By the way, you can clear the contents of the terminal that you see here. So we have some text getting outputted from Blender, and we have some commands. You can write clear and then type and enter, and that should clear all the commands that you have executed. So let me close this. And if you're not seeing this option right here, you can go into the Finder options, Finder, Services, and Service Settings. Then under Files and Folders, make sure that you have this checked. If you don't, just check it and you'll get that option. Let me show you another way that you can get to that folder with the terminal. We can use Spotlight Search to open the terminal itself. So I'm going to hit Command Space, and then start typing in terminal, hit enter, and I'll get my terminal open. So here you can see that I have the tilde right here. This tilde indicates that I'm in my home folder. Usually you'll see the folder name that you're currently working in. So let me print where we are, so pwd. So I'm in users vstepano. I can print out the list of files and folders in my home folder by typing ls, and this will list everything that I have in my home folder. So if I take a look at my home folder, here it is. You can get to it by going to Finder and then Go and then Home Folder. And this is exactly all the folders that I have in my home folder. So the Blender that is installed is located in Applications. It's located in the root of the file system, which starts with a slash. And to go to that Applications folder, I need to type in CD for change directory, and then slash, and then start typing applications, and then I can hit tab to autocomplete. And then in applications, I'm going to have a Blender app, which I can also start typing and then hit tab and get into the app. Then I'm going to hit enter, and we can take a look at where we are right now. So I'm going to type in pwd to print where we are, and we're in applications Blender. I can type in ls, and there's the contents, and I can continue going into the nested folders in the contents. It's macOS, and right here I'll find that Blender application. So I can type in .blender, and then now I can launch the Blender we had just launched a couple of minutes ago. All right, let's go back and clear terminal. So now we're in this Blender install location, but what if Blender is installed in some other folder, maybe in a home folder? So let's find out where we are. So pwd, this is where we are right now. And I can quickly switch back to my home folder using the tilde. So cd and then type in tilde, and this will send me right into my home folder. Let's print where we are. So now I'm in my home folder. I have a Blender folder here that contains another Blender install. I'm just going to keep typing tab as I autocomplete what I have here. So now I'm in my home folder, and I have this particular folder that contains the Blender install. I'm going to hit enter and change into that folder. I can print again my current working directory, and here it is. So this is where Blender 2.93 is installed for me, and I can run it by again typing it dot and then Blender. And this starts Blender 2.93. Clear everything. So right now I'm in my home folder, Blender, then show app contents, macOS, and I'm here. Let's look at this particular view to get a better view of where we are. So we're right here, and now I want to travel back into my home folder right here. And to do that, I can use the cd command and to travel one folder up where we are. So before I do that, by the way, I just want to print where we are again. So I'm here, and let me go one folder up. So I'm going to use cd and then dot dot, and this will send us into the contents folder that you see right here. So let's do that. And now we're in contents. Let me print the working directory again. And here we are. So let me do that a couple of times so I can use the slash to get out of multiple folders. So now this should get me into Blender 2.93. So here we are. Again, let's do pwd. We're here, and let's do that a couple more times, and now we're again in the home folder. So this is the basics of navigating in the terminal. Let's clear everything. Okay, let me open another terminal window in my Blender folder. So this is the Blender that is in the application folder. Remember, I showed you all the command line arguments that are available for Blender. I showed you them in the documentation that the Blender developers provide for us. You can get the same list just by typing in the help command line arguments. So I'm going to type in Blender and then type in --help and then hit enter. And this will provide the same command line documentation that you saw on the website. It'll be formatted in a way that might not be as good as the website, but it's still a good reference for you to know. And by the way, remember I told you that you can have the flag arguments or any kind of argument, command line arguments, have a short version of them. So help, this is the long version of the help flag. You can actually, instead of writing help, you can write in -h, and this will result in the same documentation. So let's do that. Print it, and look at that. We got the same documentation as we did for the --help. Let's clear this. Also, if you launch Blender from the command line and you close the terminal where you launched Blender from, it'll close Blender as well. So let me show you that right now. So I'm launching Blender, and now instead of closing Blender here, I'm going to switch back to this terminal. So this is the terminal that launched Blender, and now let me close this. And macOS is telling me that, hey, are you sure you want to close this? It's going to terminate the running process, and I'm going to say yeah, terminate, and that will kill the running Blender. Okay, let me open the terminal again. Okay, so we're back in the folder that contains the Blender executable. I'm going to print the working directory, and here we are, and we have the Blender file right there, so we can launch it. While I'm here, I'm going to create another tab in the terminal. I'm going to go into shell and then new tab, and this will create another shell in the same folder. You can also see the file path right here in both of these shells. And here I want to print out the documentation so we can reference it later as we go through the command line argument examples. So the very first thing that I want to do is I want to launch Blender and open a blend file. And to do that, I need to provide the path to my blend file. And I've created a new folder in my home folder, which is called temp. And I have my project.blend, and also I have a Python script that we're going to use later. So I want to launch Blender and open this particular blend file project. So let's write that command right now. So we need to start with the name of the program that we're launching. It's Blender. And now we need to provide the path to that blend file. And I know that it's located in my home folder, so I'm going to start my path with tilde. Then I know I'll have the temp folder right there. I'm going to hit tab to autocomplete, and then I'm going to start typing in my project and then hit tab to autocomplete as well. So this will not only launch Blender, it'll also open this particular project. So let's do that. And that project is open, and here it is. Let's close this. And you can see that as I open from the command line, I can see some logs getting printed right in the terminal. You can change the amount of logs that gets printed out into this console, and this is sometimes useful. Maybe you're running into some issues and you want to see maybe some errors or warnings that are happening as you perform some action. Okay, now let's take a look at a command line argument that controls the Blender's window size. So I'm going to go into the documentation tab that I have open right here, and I'm going to scroll up until I find the window options. And here they are, so the window options, and I'm interested in this particular window geometry. And notice this is a command line argument that has a value, and it actually requires us to provide 4 values. So the first 2 are the coordinates of the lower left corner, and the next 2 are the width and height. So let's provide that. So I'm going to select this. And also notice that the short way to write this is to use this -p. I'm going to use the long version for now. So let's write our command, Blender, and then I'm going to paste in that command line argument, and I'm going to say 0, 0, and then 800 by 600. This will not only open Blender, but it will resize the Blender's window to be 800 by 600, and it's going to be appearing in the lower left-hand corner. So let's run that. And you can see maybe this is not the best usable resolution for Blender, but you can see how you can control the location and the size of the window from the command line. Okay, let's close that. Okay, now let's not only open Blender with this particular window size, but also open our project so you can see how we can combine different arguments. I'm gonna, instead of using this long version of this window geometry, I'm gonna use the P flag. So remember, P stands for, this -P is the short version of the window geometry command line argument. I'm gonna use P, and I'm going to use the same resolution as I did before, and I'm just going to copy the path to this blend file project. So not only we're going to use a new window size for Blender, but we will also open our project file. So let's do that. And you can see that Blender opened, and it opened in that particular resolution and also opened our project file. Okay, let's close this and let's clear this terminal. Okay, now let's render the 100th frame of our project without booting Blender's UI. So first of all, let's go into the tab that has our help and then scroll all the way up. So we're going to be using this background command line argument flag. And as you can see, it runs Blender without the UI. And also we'll be using this render frame. And this is going to render a particular frame from a project that we're going to be rendering. So for this example, I'm just going to use the short versions of these command line arguments. I'm going to start with the Blender application name, then -B. Then I'm going to type in the path to our project file. And then I'm going to use the command line argument to specify the particular frame that we want to render, which is -F. And then I'm going to type in 100. And this will start rendering that particular frame without booting the UI. So let's start rendering. Okay, this finished rendering, and as you notice that this didn't boot the UI of Blender, but it still did the rendering, and this saved the PNG into this path. We can actually open this particular frame without even leaving the command line. Just by typing in open and then pasting in the path to that particular image and then hitting enter. So this is the frame. And if you're interested, I have a tutorial that explains Python script that generates this particular animation. So check that out if you're interested. So let's clear this. Another use case for using the terminal is Blender Python script development. So let me start Blender and let's go into the scripting workspace. Actually, let me make the UI a bit bigger. All right, so now I'm in the scripting workspace, and you can scroll all the way to the right and hit scripting, then hit new, and then let's create a print statement that will print a message for us in the terminal. All right, here's my print statement, and as soon as I hit this run button right here, we'll see this print statement in the terminal where we started Blender. So let's run that. See the script executed, and let's turn back to the terminal and look at that. This is a great way to use the terminal by printing out particular locations, what the script is currently doing, what object it's processing, what geometry it's processing, or anything else your script is doing. It's very useful to understand how the script is working by adding these print statements. Also, if you make a mistake when writing a Python script, for example, forgetting a parenthesis, I'm going to run the script. So this is invalid Python at this point because we don't have this parenthesis at the end, and this is going to result in an error as soon as I run it. Here Blender is telling me that there's an error, and this error will disappear after a short while, and you can get that error still in the terminal. So if I switch back to the terminal, we can see that the error persists here, and I can use this to help me fix the issue. All right, let's exit out of this, and let's clear this. Another thing that you can do from the command line is execute a Python script when Blender starts up. And I have this Python script right here, so my script.py, and I want to execute this script as Blender boots. So let's do that. So I'm going to type in Blender, and now we need to find the command line argument that will help us execute the Python script. I'm going to go back into our tab that has our documentation, and I'm going to scroll until I find the Python options. So here are the Python options, and I'm looking in particular for this command line argument, and it's just -- Python, and then we need to provide the path to the script. So let's do just that. I'm going to copy this, go back, paste that, and I need to provide the path. So the path is in my home folder, and so this is the path to my script, and it's gonna execute this script as soon as it boots Blender. And here is the scene that was generated by this Python script. And it doesn't mean that you can only generate art with Python scripts. You can also automate other things like renaming, exporting, and so on. And if you're interested, I have another tutorial video that explains how you can generate this particular scene using a Python script in Blender. So if you're interested, check that out. I'm gonna close that and let's clear this. Okay, the final thing that I want to show you today is creating a shell script that you can use to launch Blender with particular arguments. So to do that, we first need to get the full path to our Blender executable. I'm going to just print this path. Now I want to create my shell script on my desktop, so I need to change the directory and go into my home and then desktop. So now I'm located in my desktop and I can create a file. And I can actually create a file, this shell script, right from the command line by using this touch command. So this will create a file. I'm going to call it runblender.sh. So sh is for shell script. So now I've created a file. So now let's check where that file is created. I'm just going to minimize this. So here's my desktop, and here is the script right here. I haven't really added anything to it just yet, and also we need to make sure that we can execute it. Let's go back. And not every file you can execute. To make sure that you can execute this script, you need to use the change chmod. So change mod command and type in +x. So plus is we're adding, and x is for execution. And then we type in the name of the file that we want to add the execution permissions to. So this is going to be Blender, the run Blender script. So now I'll be able to execute this particular script, but we haven't really added anything to that script just yet. And to do that, I'm going to again use the open command, then type -e, and then type in our shell script, and then hit enter. Okay, this will open the default text editor. And now we just want to copy the path to our Blender executable. So I'm going to do just that. And again, this is only the path to the folder, and the full path is just going to be with the Blender name at the very end. Let me enlarge this text so you can see better. So this is the command. Now let me save this particular script. Now you'll be able to run this run Blender sh from the terminal just by typing in that shell script name. And this will launch Blender for you. You can continue to add different command line arguments just as you would in the command line. So let's do that. I want to open Blender with factory settings. So let me find that command line argument. So here it is, factory startup. Copy that. I'm going to add this, and I also want to set the resolution of Blender's window. So again, I'm going to provide those 4 parameters. So this is the coordinates and then the size of the window. I'm going to save that. So now this shell script is going to not only start Blender, but it's going to start with the factory settings and then set that resolution. So let's go ahead and rerun the script. I'm going to hit the up arrow on my keyboard and just repeat that same command. So you can actually cycle through all these commands that you've typed in by hitting the up and down arrow on your keyboard. So let me rerun this shell script. And now if you had any special settings set, Blender is going to just start in the factory setting mode, and also it's going to set the resolution. Now, if you want to run this shell script from the desktop by just clicking on this icon, you'll need to change the extension from sh to command. So if you click on this right now, it would probably open in your default text editor, and that's not what we want here. So to do that, we need to rename this shell script. So to rename, we'll use the command mv. So this means move, and I'm going to just rename this from, so this is the source name, which is the current name, and this is the target name. And I'm going to just type in .command, and then I'm going to hit enter, and that will rename our shell script. And now if we look at the desktop, you can see that it's run Blender and then command. So now if I double click on it, it will open up a terminal and also Blender. Before I summarize what we learned here today, I want you to recall 3 things that you learned from this video. You could write them down on a piece of paper, say them out loud, or maybe write them in the comments. This will help you start to solidify the knowledge you've gained today. So go ahead and pause the video now and try to recall at least 3 things. Alright, to take your learning to the next level, if you've been following along, close the terminal that you have open and try to navigate to Blender using the terminal on your own without looking back in the video. And if you haven't been following along, here's your chance to start applying the knowledge you gained today. Alright, to summarize what we learned here today, we learned why you would want to run Blender from the command line. We learned how to format the command on the command line. We learned about what command line arguments are, and then we took a look at how you can do this in practice. Alright, if you have any questions about this topic, make sure to ask them in the comments below. For more tutorials like this or Blender Python tutorials, make sure to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching.